As South Africa looks back on 8 years since the Marikana Massacre, the Vocal Right to Know campaign is today calling on the NPA, the National Prosecuting Authority, to speed up prosecutions. The organisation says to date no one has been held fully accountable. Thami Nkosi speaks for the organisation and is with me now on Monday lunchtime. Thami Nkosi, good afternoon to you. Why do you think so little has been done?
I think it points basically to the lack of political will. I think there has not necessarily been any political interest to take the responsibility for what has transpired leading into the incident. I mean, we know the email exchanges that where politicians were implicated and the political principles like the then Commissioner of Police, the Minister of Police. So in essence, it almost looks like it's the same, same script, different day, in the sense that we're going to defend our comrades as much as we possibly can. It's the lack of political will to essentially be able to prosecute those that were responsible that we think is actually the major stumbling block.
And much like the arms deal, the longer this goes on, the more it fades from public memory, the less is likely to happen. It's a scandal, isn't it?
It is absolutely a scandal, and I think the one thing that we cannot afford to do as a South African citizenry is to actually allow this to actually just slide through the same way that perhaps the arms deal and other incidences has done. One of the things that we've committed ourselves, and I know other civil society organizations like your series and other Marikana support campaign, is to ensure that we don't let this be swept under the carpet. Part of the broader question for us as a society is to say, if we continue to allow the government to sweep these things under the rug, then the government acts with impunity. And it's our responsibility, I think, as South Africans, to demand accountability and justice anywhere where there is an injustice that is actually committed in the eyes of the state. And it's not necessarily a battle for the embattled miners that have survived, and also the widows as well. But it's a South African campaign that we must make sure that it remains in the public's imagination.
You talk about this not being swept under the carpet. I would put to you in many ways, this is a carpet that is firmly nailed to the floor. How can you bring it back into public consciousness again?
What we need to do is to essentially, I was very proud to have seen some of the activities that were taking place yesterday. For example, the former miners that actually got injured and survived the onslaught, speaking about what has changed, the widows speaking about what has changed and what has not changed. And I think those are some of the things that we need to be able to put into the public discourse to be able to demand the accountability from the mine, from government, from law enforcement and everybody else. My view is that it's not swept under the carpet because there are certain pressure points that we need to put. We need to put the pressure points on IPED, for example, that has not concluded the investigations of Sin 2 of the Marikana. And they had made a recommendation that 67 police officers should actually be charged. And we must make sure that we put pressure on IPED, put pressure on the NPA to ensure that some of these things don't necessarily escape the public imagination. For example, in the northwest in Mokwase, Mr. Mpemba still continues to go to court. On a yearly basis, we go and protest whenever he appears in court to ensure that we keep this into the public imagination.
And just a final question, some of the mistakes that were made during that fatal week also perpetuate today. The problem is that we don't have a real grip on public order policing, and we have seen evidence of that during the COVID-19 lockdown.
Absolutely. What we have seen is just an escalation of the militarization and the repressive nature in which our police have become accustomed to. We've learned very little about that, about the Marikana incident, because there was an expert report that came out and said we need to retrain our public order policing on crowd management, and also we don't have adequate public order policing units. And as a result, that's why we're also calling for the Minister of Police to make that report public. It was tabled in 2018. We don't know why it's not made public, and so that we can hold them accountable with regards to whether they're transforming quick enough the police force. But like you're saying, it's gotten worse. You think about the Collins Khoza incidents. You think about the teenager who got shot in Cape Town, for example, who's fighting for his life, on life support now. You think about incidences in Malmesbury. You think about incidences about Singebalapa in the Western Cape. You think about even the use of private security to aid the police in evictions. For example, you look at KZN, You look at places like Loli in Gauteng. So in fact, what we have seen is just an escalation in the repressive nature of our law enforcement, particularly the police, and highly militarized in terms of how they go about doing their business. So as a result, that's the reason why we're calling for the transformation to start taking shape as soon as possible. So we will never forget Andries Tatane, we will never forget Marikana. And those are the two incidences in our history that really requires us to look at ourselves in the mirror.
As you say, the ball is now firmly in the court of the National Prosecuting Authority. Whether it's actually going to do anything about it or not is a moot point. Thami Nkosi from Right to Know, thank you very much indeed.